Good evening, everyone. This is Abhishek Chinchalkar. On behalf of FIRES, I welcome you all to today's webinar, which we at FIRES are hosting in association with PPFAS Asset Management. The objective of this webinar is to discuss about Parag Parikh FlexiCap Fund, or PPFCF. PPFCF is a flagship equity multi-cap scheme that provides an opportunity to the investor to gain an exposure not only in the domestic markets, but also in the international markets through its global high conviction investment ideas. Over the course of this webinar, the speaker will talk about understanding equity and equity related securities in the current market, understanding Indian equities, foreign equities, and related instruments, understanding investments across large cap, mid cap, and small cap stocks, and understanding the need to invest in a quality portfolio. Last but not the least, we will spend a great deal of time today in answering any questions that you may have relating to the scheme. The speaker today will be Mr. Ronak Onkar, who is the fund manager of the scheme. So let us jump in right away and let me hand over the stage to Ronak. Ronak, over to you.
Thank you, Abhishek, and thanks for the generous introduction. Abhishek mentioned that I'm the fund manager for the scheme. I would say I'm one of the fund managers of the scheme. My co-fund manager, Mr. Raj Mehta, and our CIO, Chief Investment Officer, Mr. Rajiv Thakkar, are also the managers of the scheme. So thank you so much for FIRES, and thanks, Abhishek, for the introduction. And I'm glad to be here to speak about one of our schemes, and this is our flagship scheme. So this is the mutual fund scheme which we started when the PPFAS AMC was founded, and this is one of our first schemes and is one of our largest schemes in the equity category. So over the period of I think past 8 years, we have had different names and different categories, but I think the name Parag Parikh FlexiCap is actually the apt title because it shows the flexibility that the scheme has to invest everywhere. And we'll go through that in the upcoming slides. So as the flagship scheme, and as the first slide says, it's an open-ended equity scheme and can invest across any market cap. And one more thing which it doesn't mention here is it invests across the world because the tortoise that we have is navigating across the world. You can see in that cartoon that we have. So the whole idea behind the scheme is that when we decided we wanted to create a equity scheme, and at that time we did not have any other equity schemes or any other schemes in the AMC. So we decided that it should mimic what we would like to invest our own money in, and a scheme where the fund managers have the full freedom to go anywhere across market caps, to go anywhere across geographies, at the same time to invest in any sector in the market. So it should not be constrained to some sector or some size of the companies that we are trying to invest in. And that automatically gives it a flavor of diversification. So, in the scheme, we can see there are large cap companies, there are mid cap companies, small cap companies, there are companies which are listed in the Indian markets, as well as companies which are listed in the global markets. Also, one way to invest in global stocks. So people have various options to invest in global securities, but through the mutual fund route and through the equity mutual fund route, this provides us an opportunity. At the same time, also provides us the tax advantage of investing in an Indian equity mutual fund. So I'll mention the details in the later slide, but over here, the mandate that the scheme has is to invest up to 35% of the scheme's corpus in the international stocks, and 65% of the money is invested in Indian companies. I'll come to that later. And basically, the scheme follows all the basic portfolio allocation regulations that SEBI has laid out for mutual fund schemes, like 10% maximum allocation while purchasing a particular security and so on. Although there are no sectoral restrictions, so we can invest in the sector, whichever sectors we want, to whatever limits we want. So the key talking point of PPFAS, and this goes back to our founding years. So the late Mr. Parag Parikh, the founder of PPFAS, always spoke about value investing and finding good quality companies to invest in. And this principle of value investing is not very new, or we did not invent it. It's been around for a long time. We know the stalwarts like Benjamin Graham, Buffett, Munger, all these people, they follow the same principle. Although the implementation of value investing has dramatically changed since Ben Graham started teaching about value investing. So what began as a finding cheap stocks, like with low price to book or low price to earnings, something like that, finding statistically cheap stocks which are nets, or which you can liquidate in the market at a higher value than what the business was being quoted at in the stock market. So all these kind of ideas which have evolved steadily over a period of time to finding a different meaning of value investing, which means that you find companies that are valuable from not just the assets or not just the base value of the company, but also the future potential of earning cash flows. And that can be in the form of having a very strong competitive advantage, having a very strong brand, having a very good quality business which keeps on generating sustainable cash flow over a period of time, and also run by competent and honest management, which actually enhances the value of the business over a long period of time. So value investing with that context is something that we follow, and we try and find businesses with this particular characteristics when we look for investing in companies in the portfolio. And to give you the analogy of a Swiss Army knife, so if you're aware that Swiss Army knife has so many tools, it's like a single product with so many tools and so many functionalities. We tried to create this scheme with the same kind of flexibility. So investors might have a diversification requirement of investing in good quality companies in India and abroad. We provided that option over here. Investors might have a diversification requirement of investing in smaller companies, mid-sized companies, or even larger companies. This scheme provides the same facility for investors. So by creating a scheme that is truly flexible, it works like a multi-utility tool. You can do so many things by just investing in one particular scheme. And also reduces the confusion and clutter for the investor, because there is one portfolio to track, there is one scheme to understand, and there's so many ease of understanding all these parameters increases dramatically. So the interesting part, even while designing the scheme, we realized that if the regulations allowed us to invest outside, we should take the maximum advantage without losing the taxation advantage for investing in this particular scheme. So for example, why choose investing abroad? So a lot of times people think, like India is such a growing country, it's a growing economy. What is the need to invest in stocks which are listed outside our country? To that, if you understand that in our country, if we are exposed to only stocks listed in our country, they're also exposed to local issues or local news flow or local things that happen. For example, if there is an election outcome that does not go in favor of what the market thinks is a good outcome, the market can crash. If there is some adverse financial crisis, like say the IL&FS debacle that happened, or the NBFC crisis that happened, or even something like a GST implementation coming up suddenly out of nowhere, and all these things which are local shocks, which are local news, which affect stocks which are listed and they operate only in India, these news don't affect companies that are listed outside of India. So by investing outside, investing some part of the portfolio outside the country, we are actually reducing some of the country-specific risks that we face by being Indian investors. Also, over a period of time, if you take a long enough timeline, say 20 years or 30 years, you will see that every few decades, the winners keep rotating. So for example, you might have at one point, say a decade where Indian stocks did phenomenally well. Some other decade, international stocks did much better than Indian stocks. The decade following that, maybe it reverses, or both of them do well. So these winners, they keep on rotating in the market, and we don't know which ones will rotate in our favor. So the point is to be exposed to good quality businesses across different markets. So if at all a particular market is doing well and you happen to have exposure to that market, you also tend to do well along with that particular portfolio of companies. Also, by doing this, like I said, since we are not exposed to local risk, we are also exposed to international risk. So if something is announced internationally, there is a global macro event that happens which affects global stocks more than it affects local stocks. I think that gets absorbed by the stability of local stocks. At the same time, if something happens in India and does not affect companies outside of India, that stability is provided by the international piece. So the volatility in the NAV is also contained to some extent when we realize that we are not dependent on a particular market to work in our favor over a long period of time. Also, the more important reason is that India, okay, it's a growing country. We have a great ecosystem of entrepreneurship. We are now seeing startups getting listed, and we have a very thriving capital market. But if you look at, say, just zoom out a little bit and go to the global scale, we'll see that India will be in the range of 3 to 4% of market cap if you compare the global market cap. So all listed stocks across the world combined, India, the companies which are listed in India, all the companies listed in India comprise about 3 to 4% of market capitalization. Now, where is the rest of this market cap coming from? I mean, where are these companies listed, which are naturally outside of India? And by going or deciding to go outside to invest in these companies, we actually improve our choice of finding good businesses. So we might have certain kinds of businesses which we are dependent on a daily basis. So for example, the tool we are using right now to conduct the webinar, although we are sitting in India using the broadband connection, which is made in India, but probably we are using a computer which is not made in India, or a mobile device which is not made in India, made by some international company. They're using a software made by some international company. We are also daily using tools like our smartphones, which have an operating system which is not made by Indian companies. The apps on that, many of them are not made by Indian businesses. But these companies are listed outside of India. And if you are aware of how useful these tools can be, then of course there's a business case that can be made to invest in these companies as well, because these are day-to-day tools that we are using, day-to-day things that we are using. So this gives a wider choice for us while finding companies. And some of the ideas we may not find listed in India. So if you want to invest in a software company whose software you like to use and it has global appeal, and the stock is not listed here, we should not be restricted from benefiting from that particular company doing well. That's the reason the flexibility afforded to us by the scheme is that we can actually execute on the wider choice that we have and invest in those companies as well. Also, when you look at the valuations of some companies, now, for example, the global markets in terms of capital allocation, in terms of valuing businesses which have a long operating history, they're actually quite mature, and they have very different capital allocation philosophy as compared to what Indian entrepreneurs or Indian managements have. So that gives you some sort of a valuation discount in many companies. So for example, in the past, we have seen some consumer goods companies which are very popular in India. Those companies whose international MNC parent, they're also listed. And if you see those valuations compared to what the domestic companies are, despite the growth rates not being too dissimilar, you would see that those companies will be valued far more rationally in terms of cash flows, in terms of earnings, in terms of the growth possibility. And they also benefit from the local subsidiary, which is listed in India. So if you're an Indian investor restricting yourself to one of the MNC companies in India, listed in India, you will be only benefiting from the India focus of that particular company. Whereas if you tend to invest in the parent company, you actually get a global portfolio of products, global exposure, global cash flows, much more stable business and cash flow sustainability over a long period of time. So some of these things are quite interesting to see when you compare valuations of the certainty and longevity of cash flows versus the certainty and longevity of just domestic cash flows. Now, if we compare those, we would want to say that the valuation should be more or less comparable. But actually, it's interesting to see that the global valuations are far more comfortable compared to the local subsidiaries. So these are some of the reasons why it makes sense to invest in global companies through this manner. And also, if you see the tax advantage that we have is that in any Indian equity mutual fund scheme, which invests up to 65% in Indian equities, it is taxed like a normal Indian equity fund. And if you cross the threshold, if you say invest less than 65% in Indian equities, then the taxation is like a debt equity scheme. So we consciously make a plan to make sure that the Indian equity exposure does not fall below 65%, so that a tax advantage is consistently available to all of our unit holders. So like I said, the instruments that we have from equity to equity related, 65 to 100% can be in equity, which is normally the case in our scheme. We also have an option. So for example, at any given point, we don't find ideas to invest in. We can also choose to be in debt securities. We can also choose to be in money market securities like cash, which is equivalent to cash. So we are not restricted from choosing not to invest. Sometimes people have this way of looking at a equity mutual fund. Like if we are giving money to an equity mutual fund, that fund has to be fully deployed at all points in time. That's one way of looking at it. But at some points in time, the markets are just too overheated. You sometimes don't find opportunities to invest in. And it might be prudent not to put your money into stocks. You can keep that money in cash and be ready. If some opportunity arises in your investment universe, you can then pounce on that opportunity and use that residual cash. Also, from the regulatory point of view, the foreign equity investments that we do can range from 0% to 35% only. So maximum for foreign equity is 35, but Indian can be as high as 100. So we don't restrict ourselves to only invest internationally. Internationally, we can also choose not to invest internationally. The valuations are not very attractive outside of the country. And if we find better opportunities in India. So that is a choice that we created with the scheme. And also based on very recent regulations from SEBI, we can also now invest in real estate investment trust and infrastructure investment trust, which are the new products that have launched in the market. Quite interesting from sustainable cash flow generation point of view for investors. Again, the range of investments is from 0 to 10% of the overall portfolio. So again, this just shows the asset allocation flexibility that we have when we invest to this particular scheme. Now, the most important question people ask is that, okay, fine, we got the point of why you invest outside, you find good opportunities, you find wider choice of companies, there is country risk that you are de-risking yourself from. But what about the currency risk? Because in any country you invest in, when you compare it to the Indian rupee, over a period of time, Indian rupee tends to depreciate against that currency. And it's not a very comforting thing because currency also fluctuates. Suddenly within a year, it can move 5-10% for whatever reason, political reason or global macro indications. So how do you manage this foreign currency exposure and how do you manage this risk? So one way to manage risk is by hedging the foreign currency exposure. So up to 80% to 85% of our scheme, whatever exposure we have to the foreign currencies, we decide to hedge them by using futures contracts from the NSE market. So these are exchange contracts. So these are not some esoteric forward contracts or some currency options that we are doing. We are using what is available for everyone to hedge their foreign currency exposure, the contracts available on NSE, BSE, or any kind of currency exchange. So what that helps us do is it allows us to benefit from the depreciation that is baked into the rupee. For example, somebody might say rupee will depreciate by 3% every year. Somebody might say 4% every year. All these expectations get baked into the futures price of the particular currency, and we can lock in a certain yield for that particular thing. And if somebody needs an explanation about this, I can walk you through in the Q&A if required. But essentially, when you're hedging the currency, you lock in that yield and you don't worry about the currency movement at all. So if the currency goes up or down, up to 80% of your exposure is already hedged. Only 20%, which is unhedged, might go up and down along with the currency movement. But the bulk of the portfolio is safe from currency fluctuation at least. So what we want to do is we don't want to worry about the currency because we are not currency investors or we are not currency traders or have some intrinsic understanding of how currency markets work. What we want to focus on is on our strengths, which is understanding companies, understanding managements, understanding different sectors, and investing across a whole gamut of companies available to us. So our strengths are in equity and not in currency. So we don't want to think about currency beyond the obligation of using a currency to buy the shares. But after that, we just want to focus on the businesses and their performance in the long run. And what the hedging allows us to do is it actually takes away that part of currency volatility from our minds. So then we can just focus on our core activity. Again, all these currency yields which are there in the futures market, they are driven by, say, the interest rates in the currency which we are hedging in the country that we are hedging. So, for example, in India and the US, the interest rates are different, the inflation rates are different. That creates that reason for why the rupee currency depreciates over a period of time against the US dollar. And that is baked into the yields that we get by hedging our currency as well. So if somebody from US wanted to invest in India and they want to hedge the currency, in fact, they will be paying that for futures yield to somebody who wants to hedge the currency because there the interest rates are exactly opposite as they are in India. So again, this is basically baking in that yield into our calculation to say, okay, we'll get this yield for sure. The currency depreciates for sure, but we're just locking in that particular yield so that we don't have to worry about where the yield will be over a period of time. Again, one of the most important questions is, the entire team of PPFS research is in India. How do you guys end up shortlisting companies outside the country? And why do you choose a specific country? Why only companies listed in developed markets? Why not going to frontier markets like Vietnam or Bangladesh or Thailand or whatever? I mean, some very, very fast growing and emerging countries. Why don't you invest in them? So one reason what we have seen in the past is developed markets where the capital market ecosystem is developed. And by ecosystem, I mean the ecosystem of exchanges, ecosystem of proper regulatory filings, uniform accounting standards, and all those things matter a lot. Because in the end, what we want to focus on is also corporate governance and our ability to understand the company's business performance, which are listed in those markets. So when you look at developed markets over there, I think they have a long enough history of 100+ years of having operated stock markets, having operated these regulatory systems. And they have evolved to a level where, of course, we cannot mitigate the idea of frauds, but they evolved to the level where the minority shareholders' interests are protected by legal bounds and the court of law is appreciated over there. So all these things, when you start looking at companies, we automatically eliminate great companies, but unfortunately, if they're not listed in markets where capital markets are developed, we will not be interested in investing in them, but we'll study them from academic point of view. So we need to have a well-developed capital market ecosystem. We need to have good corporate governance measures in place, so minority rights are protected. At the same time, the reporting of the financials also should be in the language which we natively understand. So when we speak in English, when we read in English, we understand English very well. If the financial statements are written in some local language, we have to translate it and then make sure that no vital information is lost in translation. So that adds another layer of complexity to thinking. So we decided that, okay, only in markets where reporting is done in English language and all the other previous criteria are also met, and enough liquidity is available in those markets for buying our shares, then we are comfortable investing in them. And we still have a large amount of companies. Okay, I'll come to the point about the investment universe. We still, despite having these very strict filters, we still have a large amount of companies to invest in from the overall global listed companies. And again, one of the reasons why we choose these developed markets and also the companies within them are companies of a certain size and operations across many countries in the world. So there might be a very good business, which is, say, for example, listed in the US stock exchange, and it might be a small business, a small cap or a mid cap in that country. But that depends totally on the local economy or the understanding of the local market where they operate in. And they don't derive any revenue from other countries or other cities in the world. Now, what that poses a challenge to us is we have to then go there and understand what the business is doing, rather than having the confidence of seeing a global business operating at a global scale and revenue is distributed across various parts of the world. So we choose companies which are not restricted to a geography for operations, but they are operating from different countries. They're operating and generating cash from various countries and continents, so that we are aware that this is a large enough business which has a global reach and it is diversified well enough to benefit from same trends across the world. So a consumer company selling all over the world is more interesting for us from an investment point of view than a consumer company, which is a very niche company, which only operates in a specific country and selling to their specific citizens. And the product has no context anywhere else in the world. And also, when you start creating this filter for investing in companies, you end up essentially with the countries like, say, United States or Western Europe or even developed Asia, because these markets have a long enough history and all these parameters are satisfied over there. And that still leaves us with a huge amount of companies to cover, not just in India, but also globally. So we spoke about the tax advantage of this scheme, where 65% of the corpus always is invested in Indian equities. So this is an Indian equity mutual fund from taxation point of view. Now, just to give a quick brief about the investment process, we'll start from the top left corner of how do we find our investments. So what we do is, every year we have this exercise where we screen for the quality of companies that we want to invest in. So there will be certain parameters of these businesses where it accounts for their growth in their operations over a period of time, say 10-year period of time. Then what is the return profile of that business? Is this business a good business to invest in, which will be shown by the profitability metrics, the return ratios of these companies. Then the company's valuations are also mapped across the board. And what we do is, once the screen is ready, we have a large enough investment universe, which comprises of about 700 companies, which includes domestic as well as international companies. And 700 might seem like a very small number out of the ocean of, say, 50,000 listed companies all over the world, which are investable. But actually, 700 is quite a large list. Now, when you look at all these companies, naturally, there is a temptation to cover each and every company and want to understand everything. So what we do is we distribute these companies across various sectors across the research team, and then each analyst will then deep dive into that sector. So for example, if the auto analyst who is studying all the auto companies in our investment universe, that person will study not just Indian auto businesses, but that person also study auto companies in Asia, auto companies in the European markets, auto companies in the US, or all global auto companies for that matter. So that also gives us a context of how people value different businesses in different markets, what is actually happening in different companies, what trends can be coming to our markets, what trends we are exporting to other markets, how are these markets structured in terms of operations. So for different sectors, we get a very, very diversified perspective as to how these companies are operating in different markets. So from 700, we distribute across sectors, and these sectors then are tracked by the analysts, and then they are pitched to the investment team. Now, for studying these investments, like I said, once you put up a sector for understanding, you need to compare within that sector who are the other competitors, how are they operating, is somebody doing a better job than other companies which are in that sector. And also, when you start looking at companies, you automatically understand their history by reading through their financial statements, their regulatory filings, their business history. There's a variety of sources we can use. We end up talking to a lot of people, that industry across the chain. So we might talk to some vendor, we might talk to some channel partners, we might talk to past employees, we might talk to some industry experts who spent a lot of time in this industry as employees. And that gives us a lot of context of how these companies operate, how the sectors operate. And over a period of time, you build expertise and insights and try and gauge as to how these companies operate and how our understanding evolves when we study these companies over a period of time. Excuse me. Also, one more important thing when you shortlist companies is to assess the management quality. And we mentioned that we wanted to partner with managers who are honest, competent, and they can run their businesses well, they understand their companies well. And that is something which is a little bit qualitative. You need to not just marry the business performance with the management's expectations and what they have mentioned in the past, but you also need to understand who the people are running the company. And then disproportionate amount of time goes into really understanding and figuring out. So here we have to rely on all sorts of sources of information, like media articles about the person, what is being said about that particular person in a certain context in the media. Also, how these people conduct themselves. If you find a CEO of a company always on page 3 of a newspaper, then yeah, we may want to stay away from that particular person. But if a person is sincere, you can see dedication over a period of time, and the results of the business are also in line with what management and the team of people running the business have mentioned in the past. Then we are happy that we have partnered with somebody who is competent and honest enough. At the same time, the capital allocation history of the business gives us a lot of context when we look at companies, saying that, okay, if this particular company is willing to share surplus profitability with their investors and not waste it across diversifying in different areas, or just misallocating capital over a long period of time, that gives you a sense of confidence about how these people operate their companies. Also, valuation point of view, when we look at these companies, we realize that not all countries and not all capital markets value companies the same way. So we also want to understand a global trend as to where the valuations are trending, how the companies are valued at a certain point in time when their business was, say, growing at a different pace, and now it is growing at a different pace. So all these things are factored into the valuation. We compare them with the peer group, because valuations in isolation may not make too much of sense if you're not comparing them with the similar peer group of companies. And then we come up with our own range of estimate. So it's never a decimal point accurate estimate. It's going to be a range of value where we think that, okay, within this narrow band of valuation or this wide band of valuation, we think that the business is reasonably priced. And if it's available in that band, it's a good thing to add in the portfolio. And if it is not, then we will wait for the opportunity. But if it's a good business, the investment universe then allows us to filter which are the companies we want to track. And we keep tracking them over a period of time. So every quarter or every half yearly, as companies keep announcing their financial statements, we keep tracking them. The research team keeps updating our investment team as to what is happening across these companies. And once all this research process is done, the more important part, which is finally allocating the stocks in the portfolio and building a portfolio out of all these companies, that comes into play. And here, as per regulations, we cannot invest more than 10% of the corpus into a single stock. So you will see generally 10% is a ceiling for our investments for many companies in the portfolio. Also, over a period of time, we might see valuations suddenly reaching to levels where it's not comfortable for us to own this particular business because it's become too expensive in the market. So we opportunistically sell. In the same time, when something goes up, something else must be available cheaply. We move the capital to that business, and the portfolio has a little bit of churn based on that. The churn, fortunately, has been very, very low because the whole idea behind this process is to find good quality businesses. So you put in so much effort to understand a company and you like the business and the business has a good potential in the future, it just makes sense to hold them for a long period of time so that you can actually benefit from the longer trajectory of the business growing. And it's not just buying and selling businesses as pieces of paper. These are actually businesses, and we want to partner with these people, partner with these companies as if we are investing in the business rather than just investing in a piece of stock, which we can trade afterwards in the future if we feel like it. Also, because we have a sectoral focus on companies, we have sectoral diversified portfolio as well. At the same time, like we saw earlier, the geographical diversification plays in because we also invest in global stocks. The portfolio construction actually is the most vital part because that actually gives the returns over a period of time. Individual companies can go up and down in price, they can move here and there. But over a period of time, the allocation of the portfolio is correct. If you understand those companies which are in your portfolio and you have built as per your comfort level the portfolio allocation, then I think the portfolio can do well over a period of time. And then the focus on individual stock is only from the point of view of tracking and research. But the portfolio context becomes far more important when you're investing in a mutual fund scheme. So the investment approach, this is the simplified version of the previous chart. So essentially, we are trying to partner with minority shareholder-friendly managements who understand and run their businesses well. We are also partnering with businesses when we invest in them. So that means we have a longer-term focus. We will tend to own a business for a much longer period of time because we think that we are buying a piece of that business rather than just buying a piece of stock in the stock exchange. Also, when we are looking to buy companies, one of the core filters, the financial filters that we apply, essentially filter out companies which are cash generating businesses and which are low debt kind of businesses. We don't depend on outside money to run their operations. So if a company has a good cash flow generation cycle built into it, it will generate cash for itself and it will keep growing with that same cash. And we need not rely on outside capital like debt or equity to grow its business. And these are kind of businesses we love to invest in, self-sustaining kind of cash flow companies. Also, if a business has a very strong competitive advantage or a moat of any kind that they can use to grow their business in a much more profitable manner and grow their market share over a bit of time, there is even an added bonus. Not all companies can do that. So by definition, if everybody has a competitive advantage, then all the companies will be investable and all the companies will be valuable. But that's not the case. There are some companies that are much better than other companies in any given industry because they have certain strategic advantages to them. And we try to identify these advantages and we try to filter these companies to invest in the portfolio. And the last and the most important, I cannot stress this enough, is that although you find all these characteristics in the company, in the businesses that you like, if the valuation is not right, if you are not paying the right price for it, and the right price can change from each and every person. I might think a right price for a business is to pay X, somebody might say X plus 10%, somebody might say X minus 20%, can be in the wide range of, like that's why I said valuation is going to be a range, it's not going to be a decimal accurate number. But if we are satisfied that this is a good range of acceptable valuation to pay for a business, only then we will pay that kind of money to buy that particular business. Otherwise, we are perfectly happy to sit on the sidelines, look like idiots for a while, because the market might be investing in those companies, but we may not choose to invest because our confidence in that valuation is not very strong. So unless and until we are convinced that there is some margin of safety available to invest in the particular company, only then we will invest in those companies. I think, like I said earlier in the earlier part of the presentation, that the scheme was designed in such a way that can we put our own money in the scheme, and the actually the proof is there. I mean, about 220 crores of the scheme's AUM, out of the overall AUM, is from the insiders. So it's our employees of PPFAS, the directors, the promoter family, the fund managers, the research team. Almost, I think every employee in the company has put some or the other investment in the fund, and that's actually the proof that this is a concept which is useful as part of a individual asset allocation as well. So if I wanted to invest in an equity fund, I would definitely put a large part of my allocation, not just because we manage the scheme, but also it's a useful scheme to have in the portfolio for all the reasons we saw earlier, from geographical diversification, from domestic diversification, sectoral diversification, etc. So we have had our skin in the game for a long period of time. The whole intention was to create a product where we want to keep our own money invested. So I feel very proud to say that 220 crores is a large amount of money which the insiders of the company have invested in the FlexiCap scheme. Of course, in different schemes on the website, you will see in all our schemes, we have invested, insiders have invested our own money. So that can be verified over there as well. But this number is just for the FlexiCap scheme. I will not dwell too much on the returns because these are already published in the fact sheet, so you can definitely go through. But just to give you a highlight, since inception 2013, the FlexiCap fund has given 20.46% compounded annual return. And if you see the 5-year number, also very close to that, it's 20.5% compounded annually. The 1-year number, 3-year number, although yeah, it looks exciting, it's a large number. It's fun to look at a large return. But I would say because we are investing in businesses for the longer term, you would expect our investors as well to have that same longer term horizon. And we actually encourage our investors that if you have an investment horizon of 5 years plus, only then consider investing in the FlexiCap scheme. Otherwise, find any other scheme to invest in. Because in equity, there is no guarantee when the market turns. There is volatility that can affect your goals when you're investing in mutual fund. So generally, if you have 5+ years horizon, that is the best time to invest with your surplus capital in a scheme like the PPFAS FlexiCap fund. So this is just a highlight of the top 10 stocks in the portfolio, what we own as of the June 30th fact sheet. The fact sheet is uploaded on the website, which has the entire portfolio, and the portfolio disclosure also will show you. If you see disclosures every month, you will see what stocks we have bought, how many shares we bought in that particular month, just to give you a context if you are interested in tracking to that level of detail. But just to give you the context of diversification at the same time, the top companies where we have the strongest conviction that these companies will do well over a long period of time, and we wanted to give them meaningful allocation. So this is the current portfolio of the top 10 stocks in our FlexiCap scheme. So which contains companies like Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, Bajaj Holdings, which is the holding company for Bajaj Auto and Bajaj Finserv. And everybody knows ITC, we know Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon. So all these companies are household names. Some of them are great service providers in their own sectors and big product companies in their sectors. So it's interesting to build a portfolio of these companies where not just users can relate to it, but also investors can understand that these are valuable companies from a financial point of view as well. So these are some of the scheme facts. I think these details are available in the fact sheet, so you can always look them up. Along with the expense ratio, exit loads, everything is mentioned over there. Also, when you talk to your advisor, you can ask them all these questions. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm actually more interested in the Q&A bit where interesting questions I can answer. The whole idea is to find people or investors for whom the scheme is suitable for their investment journey. So many investors may not have the luxury of investing for longer than 5 years. So they have different investment products available. The FlexiCap scheme may not be for them. But for those investors who have the luxury of time and they want to build a corpus over a long period of time and they have the patience to sit through cycles in the equity market, because equity markets, the volatility in the equity markets is a feature of that market. It's not a bug. It's not a problem in that market, but it's actually the feature of equity markets that the volatility will always exist. If you see a long enough chart of stock markets, you will see squiggly lines going up and down. It doesn't just go up continuously over a long period of time. It goes up and down. So that down, people who can sit patiently through down cycles as well as the up cycles, This scheme is very suitable for those kind of investors and those who understand that equity investments are actually meant for the longer term, where it's not some vague number. So the reason why we say 5 years is because 5 years generally you see some sort of a business cycle being played out in those 5 year period. Some cycles can be longer as well, which is fine. But generally, in every 5 years, you see a cycle play out in the stock market or in any business in their operating performance as well. So it gives enough timeline for us to judge the fund manager for the performance. At the same time, not touch the investment and interrupt the compounding process and let the money grow over a period of time. Again, the idea behind creating one product instead of creating 10 different products with the same features is to create a simple product to understand. When somebody opens a fact sheet, they should immediately understand what the scheme does and where they're investing their money in and how it has performed over a period of time. And that simplicity is something that the product gives to most of our investors. And also, like I said, people who enjoy, I wouldn't say enjoy, but people who can understand and appreciate the volatility in the market and how much opportunity it creates to invest in the market. I think for those kind of people, equity investments with a longer term focus can be game changer because they clearly give you a very long trajectory of returns over a long period of time. Assuming the underlying businesses also do well over a period of time. But the whole idea behind equity investing is that the volatility is not your enemy. It's not something that you should hate and you should abhor, because we are so used to the idea of getting steady returns. But sometimes the lumpy returns can actually change your compounding horizon altogether and make you a lot more money over a long period of time. There are also other schemes, like I said, so our flagship scheme was the FlexiCap scheme, Parag Parikh FlexiCap scheme. But later on, we had a lot of demand from our investors that they wanted a liquid scheme also from our fund house, where they can park their money in liquid fund and they can do systematic transfer to the equity scheme. So we created the Parag Parikh Liquid Fund, which does very simple thing. It's just a liquid fund which invests in government securities and treasury and T-bills and overnight securities. It's like a very basic liquid scheme. It's not focused to generate return. Its focus is to basically give liquidity to investors to invest in our equity scheme, or if they want a liquid fund product for their personal investment. After all, after the long performance of the FlexiCap scheme, people also demanded that we should have a tax saver fund, because the FlexiCap fund was only giving tax advantage to the point of the Indian equity exposure that we have, that 10% capital gains tax that is there for the long-term capital gains. But the tax saver fund has a different feature. It's like an ELSS product, equity linked savings scheme product, and this particular product also invests in the same stocks that we invest in the domestic market, but this scheme does not have the right to go to invest in global markets. So this scheme only invests in Indian markets, but it essentially mimics the same Indian portfolio of the FlexiCap scheme, tries to mimic that portfolio to some extent. So it was also another scheme we launched out of popular demand. And later, the most recent scheme that we launched is the Parag Parikh Conservative Hybrid Fund. This is a hybrid fund in the form of debt and equity, where there is some part of equity, there's some part in the real estate investment trust that we have invested in. But the bulk of the portfolio, I think 75% plus portfolio, will be invested in debt securities, where essentially it's a debt product with a little bit of a kicker from the other equity and the REIT component that is provided. So again, a well diversified product basket, simple to understand. And essentially the conservative hybrid fund tries to do the same philosophical allocation that we do in the FlexiCap scheme, where like the FlexiCap scheme can go anywhere and invest everywhere in the equity. The hybrid scheme, the conservative hybrid scheme, can actually go into different areas of debt markets and invest in securities where we won't have to take credit risk. We are okay with getting a little bit less return, but the stability of return has to be there, and additional kicker can be provided by in the form of high dividend yielding stocks or investing in REITs and InvITs over a period of time. So this is the team. As I said earlier, Rajiv Thakkar is the Chief Investment Officer or CIO. My co-fund manager, Raj Mehta, and that's me, Ronak. And I think combined, we have enough experience. So Raj and me have been here for over a decade now. Rajiv has been here for more than 2 decades. In fact, PPS has been my first job. So I have not seen any other fund house. So this has been like a dream come true for me to work for PPFAS and get a chance to manage the fund along with such fine colleagues. Again, a lot of the investment modes are available online. Please talk to your advisors to understand how to invest in these schemes. I won't go into too much detail about this. Data is available on the amc.ppfs.com website as well. Again, riskometers, I have to show this mandatorily because I discussed the schemes. But generally, if you understand, the equity funds will have a very high risk profile. The liquid fund will have a moderate to low risk profile, whereas the conservative hybrid fund will have a moderately high risk profile because of the nature of investments we are investing in. All right, thank you. I actually look forward to taking questions. So I'll stop the presentation here. And Abhishek or anyone who wants to host the Q&A, please go ahead. Thank you so much for the patient listening.
Yeah, hi, Shubham here.
Hi, Shubha.
Ronak, you have the access of the Q&A tab, right? Can you
Yes,
check
I can
that?
see the questions. Yes, yes.
Yeah, we'll take one by one. So, and in chat, I'll put.
Okay, I'm very sorry. There's somebody who mentioned no voice in the beginning. I hope Mr. Anurag was able to hear me speak. Okay, the question saying, please throw some light on what will be the fund's approach if rupee strengthens against dollar. Yeah, I mentioned this in the hedging part that we don't want to worry about the currency movement at all. So we hedge a large chunk of the portfolio, up to 80-85% of the portfolio. And once the hedging is done, we just focus on finding good companies to invest in and tracking our existing portfolio ideas rather than worrying about where the currency will be. And hedging essentially happens on the exchange, in the exchanges, in the futures exchange. So every month you keep on rolling over the position, and the same yield might be available, a little bit more, a little bit less. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. So the yield is always there as long as there is gap in the interest rates in our country and the hedging country. In our case, the US dollar is the prominent currency we hedge. As long as there is the interest rate difference between these two countries, you'll always have that gap in the futures yield, and you'll benefit from that yield over a period of time. Some questions about hedging. If you have specific questions, I can address them. Should I cash out during crash, and what do you do during a crash? Okay, so this I'm assuming is about the equity portion of the portfolio. So like I said, volatility is a feature of the equity markets. And I mean, if you have invested for the longer term and your investment goal is not close, that is a very important thing. So we all of us invest for a specific goal. It's not like just putting surplus money and forgetting about it. We're investing towards some future goals where we might require that money, say, to buy a house, to go for kids' education, whatever. There's so many things that can come up later on where we need the money for. If your goals are closer, say if your goals are within, say, 5 years of maturing, I think it's always prudent to start liquidating some of your investments to make sure that you're preserving that capital and you can meet that financial goal with that capital. But if there's a crash, and if your goal is not near, and if you have surplus cash to invest in, that's actually a good time to add some more money, because you know that the trajectory of equity markets has been good. Businesses are growing over a period of time. Economies grow over a period of time. So you can keep on investing and stick to your investment system that you have created with your advisor's help, and understand that it's the longer term process. So you might see a little bit lower returns in the shorter term, but in the longer run, you're building towards some goal. And essentially, it helps to also have a little bit lower expectations. So generally, when people show returns, so even the returns that we saw in the presentation I gave, those are past returns. I mean, there is no guarantee returns can be repeated at all. But you should always have reasonable expectations that you should not expect the same returns to keep going, compounding over a long period of time in the future as well. So temporary expectations, start with a very low expectation so that the disappointment is less, but also not so less that you are not even barely meeting your inflation targets or whatever goals you have set for yourself. So make sure that expectations are in reasonable range, and each and every person will have different expectations. So I'm not going to give you a number here. But I think if you face a market crash and if you have surplus capital to invest, that's actually the best time to invest more money in equities.
Ronak, I can see a question on methodology. So how do you select the territories, and do you invest in Chinese companies?
So far we have not invested in Chinese companies for a very obvious reason that first of all, capital markets history. We need a long enough history of capital markets, like I mentioned earlier. Also, regulatory regimes are different in Chinese countries as compared to developed economies like Japan or even US. Over there, some of these systems are evolved to the level where we can actually predict some of the outcomes that, okay, if this happens, then law is there to protect you in some way. In China, a lot of these, as the country has grown at a phenomenal pace, a lot of these things are also evolving. So it's sometimes difficult to understand the regulatory system, sometimes difficult to understand the governance system. Sometimes you may not be actually buying in the security you're investing in. You might be buying into a holding company which owns the underlying business, because it's not very easy to directly invest in Chinese companies in many cases. So Chinese companies, although we study them as a sectoral understanding from our academic understanding point of view, as because they compete with a lot of companies globally as well, we try and study them, but we have not invested in Chinese companies so far.
Okay.
There's a question over here. PPFS always keeps tracking new sectors with massive potential, but no biotechnology business in the portfolio yet. Are any biotech businesses on your radar? Several businesses on the radar which are in the biotech business, but one huge hurdle that we have to cross before investing in any company or any sector is that, do we understand the sector or not? And if we have still not built our confidence in understanding the companies in that sector, we might be tracking them for a long time, but yeah, sadly, they won't be in the portfolio, because there's no point in buying something where your understanding is not fully developed and you don't have a good hang of how the business operates. So these companies, the biotech businesses, are very good companies, but in hindsight, we see that these companies have done very well. But when they're in the investment cycle, when they're in the research cycle, it's actually very hard to predict which direction the company or the industry is going to go in, because even they may not know how the next 10 years are going to look like for that particular business. And if you see some of the vaccine companies which are there right now, nobody knew that these companies could become so well. I mean, a global pandemic had to happen for some of the companies to actually show up their potential and show that their products are actually useful in a pandemic kind of a vaccine situation. But still, biotech, a fantastic field, worthy of tracking, and we keep track of some of the key companies over their key trends. But it's not yet at the level where we can say we are fully confident to invest in these companies.
Yeah, so FlexiCap portfolio has a few businesses like Maruti and Hero, who have shown poor sales growth consistent over these few years. So what is the ideology behind the holding businesses which are shown value in pricing, but poor sales growth so far?
So financial metrics aside, the financial metrics of these companies are very obvious. These companies do very well in the financial metrics terms. In terms of sales growth, again, we should understand that companies and industries are cyclical in nature, and not everything will work at a cycle that we predicted. So we might want to assume or believe that if we invest in a particular company, that is the point when the cycle has to start turning positive, and that's the time when the company should start doing well. But sometimes even investors can get cycles wrong. So I think patience is required in this exact situation, where we might know that the company is valuable or attractive from financial point of view, but we may not be exactly be able to predict when the cycle is going to do well, or is the longer term trajectory available for the company to grow. So from balance sheet point of view, these companies make sense for us to invest in. They also share a lot of capital on the profits that they generate with the shareholders. And also they are large manufacturers at scale who can ramp up capacities whenever demand comes back at a much stronger pace. At the same time, we are seeing personal mobility trends all over the world. India, I think, is famously far behind some of the emerging countries of its size in terms of personal mobility per capita. And so as per capita income also grows, personal mobility becomes an important factor. So this is a longer term trend which we are partnering in, but that longer term trend might also have a little bit of trough in between. Sometimes it will suddenly grow. So we have to go with the cycles. So if you're going to invest in a company like that, you have to go with the cycles. But the question is, I think, quite valid. And if a long period of time goes by when these companies don't deliver the expected returns according to us, then they don't deserve to be in the portfolio eventually. So the eventual sell decision can happen for many reasons. It can be because the companies might become expensive eventually, or these companies where we thought were going to operate in a certain way and grow in a certain way did not deliver that kind of return. Then we can very easily sell these companies in the open market. And if there is a mistake in our thinking, sometimes we realize that, okay, we thought X will happen, but actually something else happened altogether. And we were caught blindsided by some event. So in that case also we can sell. So because it's a equity scheme which invests in listed companies, we have the freedom to leave or sell a particular company and find another opportunity to invest in.
Yeah, another question is there a pure US fund in consideration from Parag Parikh?
No, so
Yeah.
in fact, the interesting part is we can actually invest in the US stocks through this fund. There is a limit for every AMC up to $1 billion in terms of investing overseas. So we decided that we would rather exhaust that limit with our existing scheme, because this is the most flexible way we want to invest in, rather than creating another scheme and then blocking that limit for foreign investing. That's the regulatory part. But actually, from even communicating to investors, for us, this is a very easy platform to communicate. So that, okay, this is diversified, this can go anywhere in the world, and this scheme covers all your needs of long-term equity investing. And at any given point, we want to have the freedom of not investing in the US markets or global markets. So why restrict ourselves to a mandate when we have the flexibility in the current mandate to do whatever we want to do?
Can you explain a bit on your strategy for churning the portfolio and how frequently the fund would do it?
So far the churn is actually quite low. I think the historical low was about 3-4% turnover on an annualized basis. The highest I have seen would be less than 20%. So it has never been beyond that. And churning is I would say, a number which is computed after the fact. The whole philosophy is to buy and hold good quality companies and let them do their job. Let them grow, let them perform, let them grow in business size and everything and scale. That's the intention, to find these companies and invest in them when they are reasonably priced. And it might also happen that we might own a company for say 3 to 4 years, and the valuation runs up and we have to sell it. We might end up owning a company for 5 to 7 years because the company is still in its growth phase and keeps on investing and growing. We ideally would want to buy companies and let them grow, and we are also then able to invest in the same company again and again whenever the valuation is reasonable, so that we don't have to choose too many different companies outside the horizon. Because if the existing portfolio is doing well continuously, then the same companies can get more allocation as new funds come in. So the churn is actually a calculation made after the fact, but the whole idea is to stay invested for as long as possible till all the things that we have expected in the business to go are going right, and let it grow along with the growth in the fund as well.
Yeah. Somebody want to know about the tax advantage in Parag Parikh FlexiCap fund. So how that is benefited?
So because we have 65% plus in listed in investments in Indian equities, it is treated like a domestic equity fund. Whereas if you invest in a fund which is not investing up to 65% in Indian equity stocks, then that gets treated like a debt equity fund. So both these funds have different tax structures when it comes to long-term and short-term capital gains. And in that kind of funds, you get indexation benefit after 3 years, whereas equity, you just get a lower tax rate for capital gains.
I can see one question that is repeatedly been asked. Can I do a SIP and lump sum together? I mean, in the same scheme, it is allowed?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an open-ended scheme. You can do SIP and lump sum both based on your needs. Whenever you have surplus capital, you can add by lump sum means, or whenever you have a steady income always coming in your bank account, you can do a SIP. So both options are allowed. I think the minimum amounts, I will just tell you, 1,000, and I think these are mentioned in the fact sheet as well. I'm just sharing here for your reference. So these are the modes of investment. For lump sum, the minimum is 1,000, and you can also do that as a minimum monthly SIP, and you can do a quarterly SIP as well. So, I mean, these are all technical things, procedural things. You can definitely do both lump sum and SIP.
Why exit load is so high?
So if you see the exit load, it's only for the first 2 years. So the first year is 2%, the following year is 1%. And after that period, there is no exit load at all. You can actually redeem your investments after that period of time if you want to. The reason why it is kept so high is because we want to encourage people to think long term. So when we say we invest long term and the portfolio turnover is a testament to that we have invested for the longer term in some other companies, we also want our investors to have that same orientation, same thought process. It should not happen that we are investing for the longer term, but our investors come with a very short term expectation that these returns have to be in short term and they should get faster compounding of their money in a shorter period of time. Actually, that's not the way we want to project our investment. So, for example, when we invest in companies, we want to invest with people who are thinking in the same manner like we do. So, if we think a sector is going to do well, we want the companies in that sector to also operate in a certain manner to benefit from that thing to do well. And that means they have to keep sustainably investing longer term in that particular business. In the same way, we want our investors to also understand our focus when we are trying to invest longer term. We need to find investors who also have that same focus with us to have that good match as an investor and an investee relationship. Otherwise, people might keep on expecting the wrong things from the fund and they might get disappointed sooner if the returns are not there in the very short period of time, and which is fine because that's not the intention of the product to begin with. So I think the exit load is there to encourage people to at least stay for 3-year period so that people will benefit something from a equity investment product. And more the merrier. I mean, if you have, I'm saying 5 years, we actually put a stamp on the fact sheet saying that if you have a horizon of less than 5 years, don't invest in the fund. And sometimes people say it's pompous to say that, but actually it's required because it's a product which requires a longer term focus. You cannot have a less than 5-year horizon and expect miracles to happen. Miracles sometimes happen in the market because market can behave erratically at some short periods of time, but that's not a investment philosophy. That's not a strategy. It is a freak event that happens sometimes. So in fact, if you have a longer term horizon, stick to the longer term horizon, and that's the way to encourage it. I mean, when you put an incentive to that behavior, it becomes easy to practice that behavior, and people then will think twice before churning that particular scheme if there is an exit code available over there.
Somebody want to take a clue from you. Actually, he's asking, IPO आएगा क्या?
Of PPFAS AMC?
Yes.
Hope so. In the future, let's see.
Yeah. So somebody is asking that why CRISIL is not rated this fund since the fund is 80-year plus old.
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe I'll just check with our team and get the answer for you separately.
Oh, is this a first fund which operating with 35% foreign, assets? Investment.
I mean, you mean in the Indian?
Yeah, Indian fund operating with 35%.
So when we were starting out, we did not find too many equity funds doing this, but now there are several funds available. There are also pure equity focused funds, fund of funds. A lot of options are available for international investing through mutual funds.
One question is, market is at an all-time high now. So is it the right time to invest in mutual funds?
That question will always keep coming in. Every time the market reaches some all-time high, this question will keep coming in. I think people should invest with goals in mind, longer-term goals in mind. And if you think the valuations are uncomfortable from a historical point of view, then you don't invest in lump sum manner. You invest in a manner which will reduce your psychological pain if the market suddenly falls after your investment. So by definition, you then stagger your investments over a long period of time. You do small SIPs periodically so that you stay invested. So if the market keeps going up, you also benefit from the investments that are actually there right now invested. They keep going up in value, and rest of the capital is anyway earmarked to be invested along with the market movement. And if the market falls, your SIP anyway is continuing. You get to buy more units when the prices fall. So I think from a psychological pain reduction point of view, the SIP framework makes sense. But if people have lump sum money coming in and they want to invest, I think it's good to take a step back and reassess your market expectations as well, because we have had a sharp movement in the markets in the past year. This is unprecedented. I mean, a lot of the stocks that the way they have moved up in just 1 year. And this is, of course, not something we could have perceived. COVID, pandemic, nobody knew how it's going to affect and play out. So expectations are all over the place right now. So I think it's good to have a staggered approach to investment when things are in so much froth right now, where investment ideas may not be very easy to find. But I think over a long period of time, also the SIP concept actually makes sense for people who want to reduce psychological pain and the volatility which people may not be able to stomach in the shorter term. That can be stomached over a long period of time if SIP investments are continuing. And the investment is towards a longer term goal. But to give you a context, if you see, say, if you put a chart of say 20 years of stock market, say, just take any index of your choice, say Nifty or BSE Sensex, take a 20-year chart, and you will find there will be some peaks where it was the previous all-time high at that particular time. So you block the current piece. So for example, block the current 10 years with your hand and see the chart where the first peak was there. Now, when you remove your hand, you'll realize, okay, this was, in that time, it looked like a peak, but later on the market moved up and so many new companies got listed. The market itself grew in size. So many companies also did very well in that 10-year period, which you have covered with your hand. So yeah, I mean, markets keep going up and keep meeting new all-time highs because we are in a growing economy. We are investing in growth-oriented companies which have a long runway ahead of them. So I don't think we should miss an opportunity just because we personally perceive that this is an all-time high. It can be today's all-time high. Maybe some other future all-time high might be much higher than today's all-time high. So we have to prepare ourselves to keep invested and stay invested because that's how compounding works. You cannot just suddenly pull the plug and expect the compounding to work in the longer term.
Any future plan for relisting ETFs for the same scheme?
So ETFs actually are very different products. So ETF can create a variety of ways of investing in a low cost manner. We actually intend to run active fund only because it's more interesting. We can pick the size of companies in the portfolio the way we want to. We can design the product the way we want to. We can go anywhere through the product. So creating ETFs is not on the horizon. It's actually a very different game where you need to operate at a much larger scale. In India, the ETF or the passive investing market is still growing. I think it's a space to watch. At least from our fund house, there are no plans to launch any ETFs.
Okay. Why foreign exposure is mainly to a FANG plus stocks or technology stocks, basically. Isn't the fund focused on just few foreign stock a risk, or it's just a kind of a...
So even when you say FANG, in that acronym FANG also, there are so many different kinds of businesses. So say Facebook is a digital advertising business through social media kind of platform. Google in that FANG, the G in the FANG is a totally different kind of business. So advertising business, plus cloud computing business, plus a media business. There's so many businesses combined in one. If you look at Amazon in that FANG, it's actually a great conglomerate, which not only is an e-commerce platform, but also cloud computing business. It's also a platform business for third-party sellers. It's a logistic business. It's an advertising business. There's so many businesses combined. So the intention is to see any business. So to the tech that you mentioned, investing in tech companies only, any business, if you look in the portfolio, if you look at the exchanges we own, if you look at the banks that we own, if you look at the IT services companies we own, if you look at the auto companies we own. So all these companies are in a way tech-enabled businesses which rely on technology, and all these technology trends are beneficial for all the companies, and how they implement them, they will help their customers in the end to create better products and better services. So technology enablement is I think a large mega trend which all of us have to be invested in one form or the other. If you invest in any company, they are in that mega trend to begin with. But if you call these companies purely as tech companies, now tech companies can be, say, Microsoft can be, say, called a tech company because its core business is actually selling software, and which now has migrated to different services that they also sell along with it, different products that they sell along with it. But the rest of the companies are actually different kinds of businesses combined into one, which have the optionality to use their capital to grow in the existing business, as well as reinvest that money into other areas and keep growing those areas as well. And which is the kind of companies we want to invest in. And if you see the portfolio over the past 8 years, we have had a variety of other companies also. So we had British American Tobacco, we have Anheuser-Busch, we had Nestle, the parent company, We had invested in IBM from IT services business from US. So there are so many different. We had UPS in the portfolio. We had 3M, the parent company, in the portfolio. So at different points in time, different ideas and different opportunities will make sense to us, and that's how the portfolio will be built. If at this point in time it has these companies which so-called are tech companies, but actually are just tech enablement tools and different ways of doing the business using technology, I think we are okay to invest as long as the runway is good, as long as the companies are doing well in their operating performance, and the valuations are reasonable. That's the key part. If at any given point we think the valuations are not suitable, we will find some other companies to invest.
Great. I think we could carry on forever, but I guess in the interest of time, we would take a halt over there. And in case you have any questions, you could send out your questions to us, and we'll have a word with Ronak to probably get your queries addressed at the earliest.
See, I think the best forum for any questions. So if you are investors in the fund, or if you're interested in the fund, do watch our annual AGMs that we conduct. They are put up on YouTube for everybody's reference. So these are live events. So last year was the first time we did it completely live because of course, the pandemic, and we could not have a physical event. This year also we'll announce the event shortly. It generally happens in October, November. So stay tuned for that. But that's the best place to ask all the questions you have about the scheme, about how we manage it, what companies we have invested in, what are our views about those sectors we have invested in. And if you go to the PPFA's YouTube channel, you will find a variety of content along with the AGM videos. There's actually somebody had put up a transcript. They said that 300 hours of sectoral learning and videos. And plus there will be AGM videos as well, which go into, I think, 4 or 5 hours a piece. So we've covered a whole variety of questions. Some of the questions have already been answered over here as well. The same questions keep coming up in different contexts, but it's good for investors to get a good feel of how we think by going to the PPFA's YouTube channel. And the AGM is something you should look forward to. It's going to be this year in October, November. We'll announce it shortly on Twitter as well as our channels, all the other channels. But yeah, that's a great place to pick our brains about what we are thinking about different companies, different sectors, and our investment principles.
Awesome, Ronak. Really looking forward to that event. Again, we would like to thank you very much for this session. It is highly informative, and I really enjoyed it. Gained a lot of insight on this particular mutual fund, and looking forward to invest in it. With that said, again, Ronak, thank you so much for spending your valuable time and being a part of this webinar. And I hope all our viewers found this webinar very useful. Again, in case you have any questions, you could reach out to us, and we'll try to get your queries sorted out. So with
thanks so much, Abhishek.
Thank you.
And thanks for inviting me. Thanks so much.
Same here, Ronak. It was a pleasure that you're a part of this webinar. Thank you so much. All right. Great evening, everyone, and see you next time around.
Thank you.